We have some great presenters up here who are going to talk with you this afternoon. Let me just introduce them first. Jonathan Blackburn works at the Texas Pace Authority, and he spent some time in the UK before coming here, and was at the University of Cambridge, and is involved in some environmental startup companies that he might be able to tell us about, and renewable energy, and holds a degree from University of Cambridge and from Duke University, and also has a bachelor's in chemical engineering. So really smart guy. He's going to introduce the PACE Authority and the PACE program to us. Laura Sanchez is a graduate student at University of California at Berkeley, who is an Environmental Defense Fund Fellow at the PACE Authority this summer. And I swear, I think she's only been here for a couple of months, but I think she's talked to everybody in the industry, in the affordable housing industry, about how the PACE program could work with our affordable housing properties. And she will have some really exciting ideas to present to you this afternoon. And Mansoor Gori is a lender who can explain how the PACE program could be used as a layer of financing on existing properties for rehabilitation to build energy efficiency into your properties. He's the managing member of Petros Pace Finance, and he was president and CEO of Accent Capital before that, and really has just tremendous expertise in the financing of energy efficiency features. So I've had a lot of discussions this summer. There have been several meetings in Austin about how this PACE program could work. It's a new program. I think it's not very well known yet, but really exciting. There's some really exciting possibilities with this program. And with that, Jonathan, can you introduce it to us?
Sure. Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm Jonathan Blackburn with the Texas Pace Authority. Appreciate you guys sticking around for the end of the day. Just the one good thing about the smaller crowd is this: if you get up to leave, we're all going to notice. So, so you have to stay to the end. What I'm going to do is just give you an overview of what PACE financing is, kind of very high-level view, and then turn it over to Laura and Mansoor for some more details. I think the bulk of the session will be taking questions from you guys and having a discussion. Can I see how many of you guys are in the room are developers? You develop commercial properties or residential, multifamily stuff. So a few. So PACE financing really is a way to finance efficiency improvements to multifamily properties in a way that makes economic sense for the property owner and for the tenant. I mean, if you ask a property owner, do you want your building to be more efficient? Do you want to spend less on your utility bills every month? And if you ask a tenant, do you want to not write as big a check for your electricity every month? Without question, they're going to say yes, right? But the problem is that a lot of these efficiency projects are very expensive up front. The capital cost can be pretty immense with really long paybacks, and they're hard to justify from a traditional sense. So what I hope to show is PACE is a way to solve that problem. And at a very high level, PACE really is just a way to do some type of capital project that will lower the building's operating cost, and at the same time increase the net operating income to the property owner or to the tenants, and increase the building's value. And at first that sounds kind of counterintuitive. How can you do a capital project that actually essentially makes you money at the same time? But I'll show you how, and it really is through kind of a very simple but unique financing mechanism that makes that possible. So really, what is PACE? There are a lot of details that you could kind of get lost in, but from a very high level, PACE really is just a way to pay for a capital project without spending any money out of pocket. So the big pitch that I make with why would you want to use PACE financing is there's kind of two angles there. It is 100% long-term financing, so no money out of pocket, and it's for projects that pay for themselves. And what I mean by projects that pay for themselves, it means projects that that have an efficiency component that can generate an ROI by reducing the expenses of the building. Before I kind of talk about what are the key sells to PACE, let's talk about what's eligible, what can you use PACE for. In Texas, that's very broadly available for commercial properties, but commercial properties is also extended to include what's probably important to you guys, multifamily apartment complexes. Okay, so residential, if it has 5 or more units, it can use PACE financing. It is also extended to industrial or manufacturing facilities as well as nonprofits. So nonprofit facilities can also take advantage of PACE financing. From the technology side, really we're looking at financing things that have an energy or a water efficiency component. So that's a very broad category. A lot of things fit in that. Generally, we're talking about things like solar panels, more efficient air conditioning, HVAC, mechanical systems, LED lighting, if you wanted to switch out your lighting. Roofs is a very, very common project with buildings. So roofs, insulation, windows, things that have to do with the building envelope that have an efficiency component are really what PACE financing is geared for. Kind of the big 3 that are not eligible that you can't use PACE on are single-family residences, government-owned property, and new construction. So this is a retrofit program. If you have an existing facility or a developed piece of land, that's what PACE is targeted for. So I mentioned that you can do one of these projects and have it pay for itself immediately, upfront, and this is where I'm going to show you how you can do that. So traditionally, if you've got a property, you want to do an efficiency project, your options are, number 1, to just write a check for that project. Okay, so money off, out of your bank account immediately. Or number 2, you might be able to get some type of short-term bank financing, which is typically maybe 3 to 5 years, tops. So what PACE does is it flips that model on its head. Instead of having to evaluate a project in terms of a simple payback or an ROI, what PACE does is it's meant to be long-term financing that matches the useful life of the asset. And what the idea is that we're going to lower the payment on the financing such that it's less than what you're actually saving every year through reduced operating cost. And that difference between what you save and what you pay on the financing is an increased net operating income from the very beginning. So this by far is the biggest reason you would want to use PACE, because it is a way to generate cash, and cash is king from the very beginning on one of these capital projects. Something that also may be of interest to a developer or commercial real estate property owner is that sometimes you don't know how long you're going to hold on to that property. Maybe you're going to develop the property and then sell it a couple years down the line. And so maybe you're hesitant to invest in something that has a really long payback. Well, PACE has this unique characteristic of being an assessment on the property itself, which means that if you sell that property, it's like a fully assumable loan. And so that loan can just transfer to the new property owner. So you can now make a long-term decision on an asset that will last a long time, but that also has a long payback, because you don't have to worry about, well, what happens if I sell the property? It's fully assumable by the next owner. And the third thing I want to mention that might be of interest to the developers in the room is the way that PACE can fit in your capital stack. So typically, and I know this is a little simplified for some of our multifamily projects, but typically when you're financing a project, you've got 2 buckets. You have the debt bucket and the equity bucket. And the debt bucket is pretty low risk and has pretty low interest rates, but the equity bucket requires very high rates of return. You're having to source capital from outside investors at, in many cases, most cases even double-digit hurdle rates. Well, what PACE can do is it can fit in the middle of your capital stack and actually reduce the amount of equity that you have to raise for one of these projects at a much lower rate of return than that equity would require. So, this slide can look kind of complicated, but the bottom line is it can lower your overall cost of capital substantially and lower the amount of outside investment you've got to go source that's looking for 12% returns or 18% returns or even higher. It's a very new mechanism, but definitely something you might want to consider as part of your capital stack on some of these projects. Now I want to give an example of exactly how PACE could work, and I want to take a project and compare it using 3 different financing options. So let's say we have a project that is about $1 million, and it's going to generate $125,000 a year in savings. That project by itself has over an 8-year payback. If you're just going to write a check for that project, in most cases you won't do it. Why would you do a project that has, it takes you almost 9 years to pay for itself? So what I want to do is compare that project to the PACE option, in this case a 20-year financing at 6%, and also compare that to the bank loan option. A little bit of a down payment, a little bit lower interest rate, but a much shorter term. Cash flows tell the story, right? So that yellow line is what happens if you write a check for the project. You're getting the full benefit every year. The slope of that line is very, very steep, but the problem is you dug yourself $1 million hole from the very beginning. Okay, as a result, that project doesn't pay for itself for almost 9 years. Most of the time, that's outside the time frame from what a property owner wants to look at. The red line is the bank loan option. It doesn't look as bad from an out-of-pocket scenario. You didn't have to make, you only had to make a small down payment. But because it's a short-term financing, the payment is actually much greater than you're saving, and that one actually looks worse. It's over a decade before that project pays for itself. The PACE option is that blue line, and it is the only one that can generate a positive return from the very beginning. And while the return is modest, the slope is a little bit diminished, it's the only one that never drops into that negative territory. It's the only one that generates operating income from the very beginning. That's why I like to tell people, our sell with PACE is that it's all about cash flow. Cash is king. So in Texas, PACE is available. It is a local government program, and it is right now only available in certain areas. The big 3 being Austin, Houston, and Dallas. You could use PACE immediately on projects in those areas, as well as in a few counties down in the valley. Coming up, we're looking at rolling out programs in Fort Bend, El Paso, San Antonio, and some other places in the DFW area in the next year as well. At that point, we will have covered most of the major metro areas. My organization is a nonprofit 501c3. We administer this program on behalf of counties and cities in Texas. So you don't have to deal with the government. You only got to deal with me. Maybe good, maybe bad. I don't know. And what we do is we will go to new areas and help them start a program, and then we'll run it on the back end for them. So that's a high-level view of what PACE is. Happy to take questions once we get to the question session, but I think now I'll turn it over to Laura.
Sure. Okay. And if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand at any time, and we'll take questions as we go along also.
Can you hear me well? No? Yeah, that's because. How about now? Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. So what I'm going to be talking about is PACE financing for affordable housing. Just a quick introduction, why we're doing this. And what happened was the mayor of Austin, Steve Adler, he, in his housing affordable or his housing preservation strategy, he put together a committee to address how PACE financing could be used for affordable housing. The committee includes many stakeholders, from lenders, property owners, developers, the Texas Space Authority Group, and EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, which is the organization that I represent. And why would he do that? Basically, why would he combine affordable multifamily housing with energy efficiency and renewable energy? Different perspectives. If a building is tenant metered, so if the tenant is the one paying the utility bill, from the tenant's perspective, high utility bills have the potential to leave families without the service, because this is low-income people. So if they cannot pay for the service and they're not getting assistance from the local city, they can run the risk of not having the service anymore, and in some cases, that can displace them out of their homes because of the uncomfortable conditions. From the tenant's perspective, from the property's perspective, high utility bills increase the operating expenses through maintenance and turnover costs. Now, that's for a tenant meter building. If we look at the sub or master meter buildings, and those are the ones where the property owner either pays part or all the utility costs, in those cases, it's even more attractive to do something like this. Because of, and Jonathan explained this, high utility bills basically increase the profitability of property owners. And that, in many cases, increases rental prices, which at the end is going to impact the low-income population. So basically, investing in energy and water saving solutions has three main benefits. One, it improves the living conditions of tenants. Two, it makes housing more affordable because it prevents property owners from increasing rents. And third, it increases the bottom line profitability of property owners. Jonathan talked about this, but just quickly, because of the way the PACE Act, the legislation was written, in the residential space, we're only looking at multifamily housing projects, and those are projects with 5 or more units. We're only looking at privately owned properties, and these can be for-profit or non-profit organizations, only in the eligible jurisdictions, so those are the ones that Jonathan mentioned, and we are looking at the rehabilitation projects, so not for new construction. I'm gonna run you through the different types of affordable housing and where the opportunity is for PACE. The first and the big bucket here is public housing. The first bullet is just conventional public housing, and those are basically owned by the government. HUD or the housing authorities are the ones who own these properties, and because of that, PACE doesn't work for these properties. These are government-owned properties, so we're gonna leave those aside. However, in 2012, because of the declining budget of HUD and the increasing deferred maintenance of public housing, they introduced the RAD conversion program. RAD stands for Rental Assistance Demonstration, and what it does is it transfers the asset from the government to a third party, either for-profit or non-profit. And the reason why they do that is because these properties, once transferred, they can have access to private capital to rehab the projects. Now, during the transition, so all the states and many housing authorities are going through this process. HACA, which is the housing authority of the city of Austin, they are going to transfer or convert 9 of their properties this year, and the remaining 9 properties next year or 2018, where they are already working on this. And this is important because during the transition process, all these properties, they have to show a rehabilitation project that includes energy efficiency measures, and they have to show the sources and uses of funds. So PACE is a big opportunity here. All these properties are looking for funds and are going to do energy efficiency investments. The second bucket, this is the mixed finance structures. These are basically privately owned or owned by nonprofits, but receive public subsidies, either through HUD, the Housing Authority, USDA Rural Development, TDHCA, or entities at the city level. If we look at the very low income population, and that's the one earning between less than 30 to 40% AMFI, which is the area median family income, most of the units available to this population is in this bucket. And these are eligible for PACE. But the big question is, they get subsidies from so many entities that who would have to approve PACE? How would it work? So I'm gonna run you through different scenarios in a few minutes. Before I do that, just the third bucket is going to be market rate housing, and that's just private housing with no subsidies. In those scenarios, it would work as a commercial project where the property owner would work with the developer, with the PACE lender, the PACE administrator, and the mortgagee if there is a mortgage in the property. Before I go over the different types of approvals or who would have to approve it, I wanted to show you a case study because this was a very complex deal that included PACE. And it happened it was announced in November last year in Washington, D.C. This was a $17 million redevelopment of an 84-unit complex. It included many different the capital stack was composed of many different layers. It had HUD subsidies provided by the Housing Authority. It had 9% low-income housing tax credits, with Wells Fargo providing the equity. It had notes issued by the city, grants coming from the city, a $700,000 PACE loan, and some other funds. So you can see the structure was quite complex. Only 2 organizations had to provide lender consent for the PACE loan. One was the local housing authority, and the other one was the city because of the notes that they issued. That said, the PACE administrator also worked with the entity providing the tax credits and with Wells Fargo. They didn't require lender consent, but they wanted to understand how PACE worked. So those were the conversations that they had. Now, this doesn't happen in every single case, and I'm going to explain that a little bit in the next few slides. The expected results of this PACE investment or PACE loan are $73,000 in annual savings from reduced energy and water usage, $6,000 annual cash flow that at the end of the project totaled $90,000, and you can see the environmental benefits.
Laura, can I ask you a quick question? That's really cool because it's a 9% tax credit development, and many people at this, many of the developers at the conference are involved with the tax credit program. But can you speak some to the utility allowance and how that plays into this, so so that this would end up
Sure.
helping the owners?
Basically, when there are rental assistance programs or when there are tax credits involved, and the tenants are the ones paying the utilities, there's a utility allowance in place. And the utility allowance is an estimate of a household's energy consumption. Depending on who is the one providing the capital, either HUD, USDA, or TDHCA in the case of Texas, the utility allowance is calculated in a different way. It's reviewed once a year sometimes, but the important thing with the utility allowance is if there is a utility allowance, that tells you who has the benefit of lower utility bills. If it's the owner, if it's the tenant, or if it's the housing authority. I was going to explain that in a few slides, but just the key thing here is if it's USDA, rural development providing the subsidies, the benefit can transfer from the tenant to the property owner without increasing rents. It's the same pie, it's just who gets the benefit, it goes to the property owner, which is, it gives the economic incentives to the property owners, which is what we want. If it's the housing authority or if it's HUD, it's different. The benefit goes to the housing authority. And that's something right now that is a nationwide concern, and they are going through, and they are talking about this.
But there is an opportunity in a tax credit development for the utility allowance to be decreased through the energy efficiency features, which could generate more cash flow for the owner if the utility allowance, if there's solar, for example, on the development. So that's an opportunity I just wanted to flag for everyone.
Thank you. Yes. Just to explain a little bit what happens if HUD is involved, if the USDA rural development is involved. Basically, with HUD, there are 2 different buckets. We have the HUD-assisted properties, and these are privately owned properties that receive rental assistance from HUD or the housing authority. If that's the case, if one of these projects wanted to use space, they would require lender consent from the housing authority. We already have a precedent case, which is the one that I showed you in Washington, D.C., and we are talking to people at HUD and the different housing authorities just to get them familiarized and comfortable with PACE. If we talk about HUD-insured properties, and these are properties that have a mortgage insured by the FHA, in those cases, HUD directly would be the one providing lender consent for a PACE loan. Now, we don't have a precedent case here, but at least last week, HUD issued the guidelines for properties that currently have a PACE loan and the one or that are applying for FHA insurance. So we have steps, and there are things happening. California already has HUD guidelines for multifamily housing projects that are insured by the FHA. We're also talking to people there just to get them comfortable with PACE. Switching to the USDA Rural Development Group, they have 3 different programs, even though only with the first one, the Direct Loan Program. With that one is the only one where they become the mortgagees. That said, with any program, any of these 3 programs, they would need to provide lender consent. The process is not simple, but at least the area directors in Texas or the state multifamily housing directors. They are very excited about working with BASE. And the way that it would work is a project developer, a project owner or a developer would file the paperwork with the local agency. They would submit that paper to the state level, and then they would look for national approval. We are in conversations with each step of the process just to get them familiar with BASE. And they're on board and looking forward to have properties using BASE in their projects. Then if we switch to the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, many of you know about this, so they have the tax credit program, either the 9% or the 4% tax credit program, or low-income housing tax credit. So projects can finance rehabilitation projects through tax credits, or projects maybe use tax credits when they were built years ago. In either case, if they wanted to use a BASE loan, the TDHCA wouldn't have to provide lender consent, but they would just be interested in understanding how it works because they do have to approve the capital stack and if all the sources of capital are reliable.
One thing I want to point out is that this program is only available to existing properties, right? Not to new construction. So it would have to be an existing tax
For
credit.
rehabilitation.
Right.
But what happens is, like, some of the properties, when they were built, they had tax credits, and that means that there is an investor involved. So that my next point was, because tax credits, the benefit comes over time, so you normally have an investor putting in the upfront capital. Whether or not that investor has to provide lender consent varies on a project-by-project basis. The one in Washington, D.C., the investor was Wells Fargo. They didn't have to provide lender consent, but they just wanted to be informed and understand how BASE worked. But we have seen other projects, not necessarily residential projects, but projects that involve tax credits, and the investor did provide lender consent. So it varies on a project-by-project basis. Then the multifamily direct loan program, that one is the only one where the TDHCA becomes the mortgagee of the property, so they would have to provide lender consent. The property owner or developer would deal directly with them and with the BASE lender and the BASE administrator. We are also in conversations with them just to get them familiar with BASE. Then last, at the city level, if we look at the city of Austin as an example, we have the NHCD, the Neighborhood Housing Community Development, and the HFC, which is Austin Housing Finance Corporation. And there are other entities, but just as example, these two, they issued general obligation bonds, private activity bonds, and many types of grants for rehabilitation and development of affordable housing projects. In the case of Austin, the entity that would own a property, that would be the mortgagee, or that would insure a mortgage is the AHFC. So they would be the ones providing lender consent to a BASE loan. We have talked to them, and they're on board with BASE.
Well, and just to go back to what you began your discussion with, the mayor of Austin is really fired up about this program. And so when you say they would provide their consent, they would actually, I think, nudge anyone who's they would try to encourage anyone who's trying to develop a property in Austin to consider the PACE program because Mayor Adler is really, really excited about this program.
Yes, what we are doing is basically the mayor, he put together this committee and we are talking to everyone involved. Just because once they hear about BASE, once they understand how it is, they are interested and they want to know more about it. But what happens is, it's not in the hands of a property owner to get it done because they need approvals from whoever is providing public assistance to those properties. So that's what we are doing right now. At the city level, we have a check where they are willing to work with BASE. Now, these are my last notes. Basically, even though we already talked about this a little bit, who benefits from lower or from utility cost savings? Even when the building is tenant metered, there are always benefits that, or in many cases, there are benefits that go to the property owners. And why? In affordable housing projects, many property owners pay for common areas, the utilities in common areas, or these were buildings that were built many years ago when water couldn't be tenant metered, so they are paying for water. So there are many cases, and it varies on a project-by-project basis, who gets the benefit. And here I had the utility allowances topic, and it's because it does matter. It does matter how it's calculated, how often it is reviewed, who is calculating the utility allowance, if it's HUD, if it's the Housing Authority, if it's USDA. That all matters in terms of who is getting the benefit or who's going to get it in the long term. Then I just wanted to touch a little bit on PACE versus other funding mechanisms because I get a lot of questions on this. And it's basically when you use tax credits, if you're using the 9% tax credit, the funds only cover between 60 and 75% according to developers. So developers would have to go outside and find the other funds. If it's 4% low-income housing tax credits, they would only cover 30 to 40% of the funds. So they would have to go outside and find the remaining funds. Now they can go and get a commercial loan, but as Jonathan showed you, there are different things with a commercial loan where normally involves a down payment, and they can be accelerated upon sale or foreclosure. With PACE, you don't need a down payment, and it doesn't accelerate. Those are just a few of the benefits. Even though PACE can cover 100% of the costs necessary to fund this type of investment, is not an either or, but it can be just combined in the capital stack of these big projects. And last, the pilot projects in Central Texas. Basically, in doing this research the last 2 months, we have a couple of projects. And the idea with this is just to get people comfortable and familiar with PACE. I don't want to get into the details because I think I already took a long time. So I'm going to switch it to Mansour, and we can take questions at the end.
You know, one thing, as Mansour is coming up to speak, one thing I wanted to mention is that dinner last night I was talking with a few developers about this program who were pointing out that in a sub-metered property, this is really advantageous to the landlord because you don't want your residents to be in a situation where they can't pay the utility bill, and so it's advantageous to everyone for the utility bill to be as low as possible. And in some ways, the landlord is the payee of the utility bill when it's sub-metered. So that's another opportunity for this program. Go ahead, Mansour.
So just quickly, how many people have heard of PACE before coming here today? 4. All right, not bad. Hopefully this will be another.
Our city approved it last May, and we have an administrator already.
What city are you in?
City of Dallas.
Okay, yeah, that's the administrator right there.
Oh. Okay, good. We have a property with Providence at Mockingbird that we've had ICAS go out there and already do an estimate several months ago, actually.
Okay.
But we're running it through, I know it's probably optional about the general partner. It's Alden Torch, but they're taking it to their committee to approve it. It's because of the debt that we've seen.
Okay. Are you with the city?
I'm with the city, yeah.
And
Also economic development. But I'll give you my.
Okay, yeah. So I know Kevin and Heather pretty well. I guess, we just haven't.
This is the first one they're doing now, as far as I can tell.
And Karen, I've been asked to repeat questions. So Karen pointed out that Dallas has approved the PACE program, and that there's one property, Providence and Mockingbird, that is moving forward with PACE financing, right?
We're excited about it, we really are.
Great.
Great.
So, anyway, and we have to get Freddie Mac on board, but Alden Torch was the general partner before we took over, was the limited partner. They have the relationship with Freddie Mac, so they're gonna facilitate that. So,
Okay.
we're excited about it. Thanks.
Great. Well, for those of you who haven't heard of PACE, maybe this is another arrow for your quiver here. Anyways, so let me just tell you quickly, oops, what am I pressing here? Yeah. There we go. A little bit about Petros. We are an Austin-based private lender focused specifically on the commercial, industrial, and multifamily PACE markets. We have a national platform, so we've done deals in so far 6 states, and are looking at deals in other states as well. We've worked extensively with the state programs, trying to get them as efficient as possible so they're easy to work with. We have a really experienced team that has lots of experience in lending as well as structured finance. We've raised over $1 billion in capital commitments to do everything from PACE projects to other types of projects as well, but very strong institutional investors. A typical PACE project for us will look like this. It's typically greater than $250,000, although we have done deals down to about $100,000. And we really don't have an upper limit, so we have substantial capacity to do very large projects as well. We really like the longer payback projects, the ones that typically have terms that are greater than 10 years. We like deals that are 20 to 25 to 30 years. So it's really kind of our sweet spot. So what are the problems that affordable housing multifamily owners are actually facing? First of all, there's an aging building stock. According to HUD, about 80% of their portfolio, multifamily portfolio, which is around 15,000 properties, is between 20 and 40 years old. Pretty old. I suspect that's also the case in other markets. So deferred maintenance is a problem. These older properties need more upgrades, more rehab. A lot of times these property owners don't have the available cash to actually do the amount of work that's needed to get done. Traditional financing, as was mentioned once or twice, is not as sufficient as it should be. These large these EE projects can have long paybacks. So some of these short-term loans you get from banks, they just don't pencil out very well. And some of the tax credit structures that were talked about a little earlier also don't give you the amount of capital you need without going out and raising equity. So PACE gives you the opportunity to actually extend your capital budget. You can actually, you can actually pair up with a loan or a tax credit structure and fill in that gap that's in there. And you can support additional scope of work. And actually, that means that the property owners are not just looking at the most urgent fixes. They can do a more comprehensive, holistic view of the property and do a larger project. So how do you get approval to do a PACE project from one of these agencies? Well, first of all, it's not very easy, but here's some of the criteria. You have to be in compliance with all your business agreements with HUD. You have to have a positive operating profit net income for the prior 3 years. Your current debt service coverage ratio needs to be at least 1.10, and there should not be any material adverse change in the financial condition of the property. To do a PACE project, you have to have an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit done, and that's usually done within the prior year. Mortgage lender consent is required in these situations. And the SIR, which is the savings to investment ratio, has to be greater than 1. So basically what that tells you is that the savings must offset the costs in the project. Finally, the term of the PACE assessment can't exceed the weighted average useful life of the energy enhancements being implemented. Yeah, I'm missing a slide. Oh. So has anyone ever done a project approved by one of these agencies? Well, I'm happy to say that we were the ones that did the first project that was approved by USDA in the country. It was a project up in Greenville, Michigan called Cambridge Courts Apartments. We worked really closely with the property owner. They had about 66 properties throughout the country. This was the first in a series of 5 projects we're doing with them. Total financing on this project was a little lower than we normally do. It's about $117,000. But if you look at the average annual cash flow after the cost of the PACE assessment, $6,500 over, and that's annually over 20 years. That's kind of a net IRR of 5.5% annually after the cost of financing. Not bad. The impact was pretty tremendous on this property. We were able to reduce the energy consumption by about 40%. Some of the improvements that we put on here were solar, low-flow plumbing, high-efficiency boilers, and then thermostats. So, I got to tell you, we did the project, but it was very difficult to do, especially that first time around. But after we got USDA comfortable with kind of what we did, they were really pretty strong supporters of the PACE program and now understand the benefits that it has for their portfolio. The statistic that I heard from the people at USDA was that in their portfolio they got about $26 billion worth of rehab work that needs to be done. They've only got $4 billion worth of capital available to do those. So there's a huge gap that needs to be funded. And so they look at PACE as one of those opportunities to actually bridge that gap. Anyways, I'll shut it down now and open it up to Q&A.
Yeah, and let me just, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask,
And do you mind going to the microphone, or I can repeat your question either way?
My voice tends to carry.
Okay, go ahead.
My question was related to the interest rate on the PACE loan, I guess. And, first of all, it is a loan, so it is a lien. They do file lien on title.
No.
Is that correct?
So, well, there's a
Can I just repeat the question? So, for the camera, the question was whether it's a loan and there's a lien on the property,
Recorded lien on
a recorded deed of trust on the property.
It's not a recorded lien on the property as a loan. It's a recorded lien on the property as an assessment. Okay? It's a little different.
Right.
So really the differences are, from a mortgage lender's perspective, they have the first lien on the property. And if there's a default, they can take over the property and go ahead and sell it to get their loan paid back. On a PACE lien, it's treated as a property tax. So the only thing that's in front of the lender at any one time is any delinquent amount, okay?
Okay.
So you can't accelerate a PACE loan, okay?
So, and there's, I think you said that there was a 6%, or at least in the example on the cap stack, you listed 6% as the interest rate. Is that statutory, or is that just an example?
That's an example.
And that question was, is 6% a statutory interest rate for a PACE loan, or is that just an example?
It's an example. So
And what are they, I mean,
say something, John?
market rates apply, I guess?
market rates apply, and that it's just a function of kind of where rates are going. Right now, it's a great opportunity to actually do a PACE loan because, as you've seen, the interest rates have gone down significantly. So,
Are they generally in line with mortgage rates? A little bit higher?
yeah, the higher mortgage rates. They usually trade, based on the 10-year Treasury, which is how a mortgage trades as well, but it's a different spread typically, and that just changes on a daily basis.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? One other point that I was going to make is that this is a new program, and so HUD seems very much on board, as Laura pointed out. HUD is on board with this. So if you have an FHA insured loan, we should be able to get HUD support. Could anyone on the panel speak to some of the other lending possibilities? So, for example, where we are with a Fannie Mae loan.
I don't think we're anywhere yet with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. They still are holding a position that this is a breach of their guarantee on those loans. So maybe eventually they'll come around, but at this point it's only FHA, USDA, and HUD kind of gone.
But I want to add something. Sorry. The guidelines that came out last week, it's for properties that currently have a PACE loan and want to get an FHA insurance, not for properties that are currently insured by the FHA and want to do a PACE loan. So there is a difference there, but it's definitely a good sign and going towards the right direction.
Yes.
I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of it. So if it's a tax lien, would the payment back on the loan be through the tax office?
So it varies. For instance, in Texas, we're actually collecting all of our own payments. In some jurisdictions, they require you to go through the tax bill and get it collected with a normal tax payment. But in Texas, we service our own loans.
So if there's a default, how does that work?
Good question.
Can you repeat the question before you
If there's a default, how does that work? So it's really kind of a four-step process. So we usually set up our direct collection loans where our payment due dates are about 90 days ahead of when the normal tax bill is due. So if there's a late payment on our note, then what we do is we try to collect directly. Send them a couple letters saying, hey, you guys are late. If we can't collect that amount of time, the 90 days, gives us enough time to contact the county tax assessor and say, it's a delinquent property tax, put it on the tax roll. Then the county tax collector will then try to collect it as he would a normal delinquent property tax. If he can't collect it through that process, he'll go to a tax foreclosure. And in a tax foreclosure, the only amount that's collected for us as the delinquent PACE lender is that delinquent amount. The remaining amount stays with the property and transfers to the new owner.
One other question. So I'm up here from San Antonio. I noticed Bexar County is in the program, which is the county San Antonio's in. How does that work right now?
I don't think they're on board yet, are they?
They don't have a program yet, but we are in discussions with Bexar County. If I had to guess, I'd say they're probably 6 to 12 months out before they have a functioning program.
Okay. And you said you were going to have a future program in San Antonio. That when Bexar County agrees to it, then it's everything? Or I was wondering what that meant.
Yes, so in San Antonio, it will be Bexar County, which it will include the city. So for example, here in Austin, the program is actually Travis County and Williamson counties. Both counties have programs, and that includes the city. The counterpoint to that is, we heard from Dallas, so that's actually a city program. So in Dallas, it's just within the city limits.
John, can you talk some about how counties can get approved for the PACE program? There may be folks here who are working in counties where they'd like to go through that process.
Okay. Yeah. Is anybody from county? Any government folks? Okay. Yeah. So one of the things we do is we will assist counties with setting up a program. There are a number of statutory things that have to happen. It can be kind of an esoteric process, but we've kind of streamlined it. We've gotten pretty good at helping folks institute a program. And then on the back end, my organization is a nonprofit that will administer programs for counties at no cost. So for example, in Travis County, we have a contract with Travis County to administer their program, and we don't charge them anything.
Question. I'm familiar with the state programs like Lone Star and those that do something very similar to what this does. Is there any interaction there between the two? Do they ever work together on a project, or is there any coordination going on? Or are they just two separate programs that there is no interaction?
Did you repeat that? Okay. Yeah. So Lone Star is a separate program from PACE because Lone Star is for state-owned buildings, whereas PACE, you can't use that for buildings that are state-owned. However, I'm very good friends with the Lone Star folks. They have been very involved with developing our technical standards behind PACE projects. So the amount of technical validation that goes into a project is similar, whether it's PACE or Lone Star. But functionally, they are they look very similar in that it's a long-term loan for an efficiency project, but Lone Star is for government-owned property and PACE is for private-owned property.
Do you have a question?
So if I understood, I heard you correctly, you say there is no you want long-term loans, you don't allow prepayment?
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
The question is about prepayment penalties. So we do have prepayment penalties. Our institutional investors are very long-term investors. They hold these things, and they have to match their assets to their liabilities, right? Which is why we're doing these things. It's essentially a fixed income product for them. So there are prepayment penalties for some number of years. It's usually 5 or 6 years, and after that, they kind of go away. Yeah.
How does that work when, say, the asset sales or refis?
It does apply in a refi. It doesn't apply in an asset sale.
And in an asset sale, the PACE loan, you have the option of, it's like a fully assumable loan. So it's almost as if, you would do a financial analysis to decide whether to leave the assessment on there. But it's essentially, your property would come with built-in financing, right? Because it is an assumable loan. So that's less leverage that the new owner has to then raise.
It's automatically transferred by statute. So all you have to do is just disclose it at the closing.
Is there an application process for that, for the buyer?
In the event of a sale of a property, the PACE assessment is on the property. So as Mansour mentioned, as long it has to be disclosed, but there is no.
It's automatically transferred, so they don't have to sign up to try to get approved for it. It's on there.
Mansour, you mentioned a 1.0 debt service. I think it was an income to savings ratio or
Savings to investment ratio.
Savings to investment. Can you just talk some about that? How that's calculated?
Sure. So we can actually look at this example here. The assessment here was $117,000. As you can see, the annual savings, the average annual savings on this project was 17 grand. The annual payment on here is 10.5. So there's a net average annual cash flow of 6,500. So when we talk about the SIR, what we're saying is that savings number is going to be greater than the payment number over the life of that loan. So you're always going to be, at least $1 ahead after that 20-year period by doing this project. So essentially, you're not having to pay for the project is another way to look at it. It's covered by the savings.
If the program isn't currently offered in a county, how would you push the county staff to participate, or how do they start participating?
So the best way is, just to contact us, and we've kind of got a process set up for doing that. Now, really at the county level or the city level, you got to have two things. You have to have a staff member that's willing to dedicate some time to, working with us and figuring out the nuances. And you've also got to politically have preferably the county judge or some other county commissioner that's willing to champion the program. In any area that wants to have a program, if you've got a project, business industry support is key. So if you are, a business member and you're willing to help us, talk to the county, that helps, especially if you've got a project that brings jobs and economic development and, reduced environmental impact as well.
And just to kind of piggyback on Jonathan, we've actually worked together on trying to get some of these different counties and cities passed. And it does go a long way when there's a project with a very reputable company that they're saying, hey, we want this to go through. We want to do this project. It adds a lot of value and credibility to the process.
Yeah, and it helps when you have, I know we've had you and counties, testifying before saying, just the amount of capital that you have available to invest in that county, because it can be pretty substantial. These projects can be a really nice economic development tool for an area.
So on an aggregate level, what's the impact from the total number of units you've impacted with this type of product?
So I'll let.
Who are you talking to? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question was an aggregate, number of units that have been impacted. It really is project specific. So full disclosure, we're currently sourcing our first multifamily project in Texas. So I'm going to defer to Mansour to.
Yeah, so this is just one project we've done up in Michigan. And there's, like I said, this is the first in a series of 5 projects we're doing with these guys. But we're also doing, kind of a mixed-use project in Michigan as well, which has retail, commercial, as well as multifamily all in one project. And that has new market tax credits, that has low-income tax credits. It has, a very complex structure. But it does hit various different areas. And the impacts on these things are really pretty dramatic. A lot of these buildings are older. And so they're using very outdated, very old chillers, boilers, those kind of things. And there's been major improvements to that technology since these things have been put in place.
The other case study was the one in Washington, D.C., and that was 84 units. So those are the one in Michigan and the one in Washington, D.C., those are the only 2 multifamily housing projects using PACE right now nationwide. And Jonathan is here working with a couple of projects, but those are smaller, between 17 and 20-something, I think.
Yeah, historically, PACE has been used for commercial properties like office buildings and those kinds of things. Industrial buildings, things that are just highly inefficient. It's just starting to kind of take off in the multifamily space now.
that assessed value, that is a fixed value, like you have the assessed value of 117,000, that is fixed over the life?
20 years. Yep.
So it's separate from the property, so it's assessed through the property taxes?
It varies by jurisdiction.
Okay.
So, in California, yes, it's actually put on the property tax roll and it's paid as part of the property tax. In Texas and Michigan and some of the other states that we work in, we actually collect our own, okay? So we, as part of the transaction, what we'll file is what we call is an assessment contract. And the back of that assessment contract is the amortization schedule of the payments. So everyone knows that this 117 will be whittled down principal plus interest over a 20-year period at a fixed rate.
And the fact that this is an assessment and not a loan does have some accounting implications, because, I mean, this is not debt. It is an assessment on the property. And so, for what we do for our projects in Texas, even though we're not, the counties are not collecting it themselves, they will send out a notice of their annual assessment each year to validate the assessment nature of it, that it really is it's a property assessment and not a loan in the traditional sense.
So is there any negative impact to making these improvements, that it then improve the property and there would be some type of increased property taxes because you've now made this improvement to the property, and that would impact yes, you're getting savings, but now my property taxes are higher because I've made the improvement to the property?
Sure. So the question was, what happens to will my property taxes go up? And I can tell you that in our discussions with the appraisal district, for one, solar is exempt, so that's unquestionably not going to happen. And they will also, the appraisal districts have told us that, as far as efficiency improvements go, they don't really account for that in their in their appraisals. They're actually assuming that you've already done this stuff, so you're probably already getting charged for that.
The time that you get caught for that is really when you sell the property, and all of a sudden, your NOI goes up, so you attach a cap rate to it, and your valuation of the property goes up, and then the new buyer gets stuck with the new tax rate.
What happens when there's a property tax exemption because it's an affordable housing project? Is that a consideration at all?
So the question was, what about a property tax exemption? From a PACE perspective, not really a consideration because nonprofits are eligible. So there's no eligibility issues there. Any other issues that might
The two deals that have closed in Texas were nonprofits.
Right.
Sure.
We funded them, so we know.
Yeah, I don't see that there's much of a difference if there's a property tax exemption, for example, the ad valorem exemption, if there's a governmental entity that's providing that, and a tax credit development. One thing I wanted to mention, kind of in response to your question, is that there may be a little bit of downside in the first year before you can prove up the energy efficiency savings and get a lower utility allowance. So you may lose some revenue in that year because you're paying for the debt service on the PACE loan, but you don't have the lower utility allowance. So that's just something to consider.
But it does depend on if you have solar and there's ITCs involved or RECs or whatever, that would offset that.
Are they in terms of eligibility, are the residents means tested, or the people that are living in the apartments means tested to be eligible for the program?
I can tell from the PACE perspective, no, because we're really looking more at the property and the improvements. You can comment on your underwriting.
Yeah, so no, we don't go to the individual level. We're looking at the property and the property owner, or whoever the entity that owns that property. Typically, these are done through some kind of a partnership.
So the eligibility right now is based solely on who financed it?
Who owns it?
Who owns it? Yeah.
Well, but even if you're a conventional owner, if you've got Fannie Mae debt on it right now, then you're more or less excluded.
Yeah.
Until, as you're
Right.
working through the program.
That's right. Yeah.
Any more questions? Any other comments anyone wanted to make? Well, let's thank the panel. They did a great job of explaining this new program. So.